Neil.
Wait, did he get everyone fired up, or did he get everyone fired up?
Great question. I don't think he actually fired anybody up. That's the problem.
Oh.
To the point that you alluded to earlier, Neil, James and I sent James exactly what I'm going to say about the coaching hirings that are happening right now in the NFL, because there is definitely a problem, and it does stem from the Rooney Rule. And this is exactly what I wrote to James, and I'm going to read it because I felt like I gave it 100% thought as I was writing it.
Does it start, dear James, or my darling James, or?
To my co-host, whom I would never want to do another podcast without, James.
Oh,
how's that?
Oh, that's lovely.
Is that good?
Beautiful.
I am not naive enough to believe that there is no racial bias in the NFL, and all we need to do is look at the Colin Kaepernick situation to see that. What I will say is that the Rooney Rule was a flawed affirmative action response that was doomed to fail from the start. That said, it has had a positive baby step effect on the league. It's clearly not the solution that everyone was looking for or was hoping for. The problem is we're in the year 2020 and we need more than just baby steps. It's ridiculous that racial bias is still a thing in 2020. Can we please get the aliens from another planet to invade us so we can all bond together already? I mean, enough of this disgustingness.
And what I find totally sickening is the fact that Colin Kaepernick didn't even get an interview in one of these head coaching jobs.
That's a good point there, Neil.
Thanks.
We have discussed this issue on the podcast in the past, and I would recommend that you go back and check out any of the conversations we've had about this particular situation. And we've noted that while we're blaming the owners, there are a lack of minority coordinators in the league, and that is on the head coaches. And I also want to make sure we realize that there are other minorities other than African Americans. Ron Rivera is a minority hire. Brian Flores is a minority hire. It's still not enough, and it doesn't give the owners a pass on what's been going on in the last few years. It's not even close to being enough. And we are definitely doing a special podcast later in the offseason. James and I have already discussed some of the people that we're going to be reaching out to, former black quarterbacks, about why they aren't in coaching, and find out maybe what some of the blocks that they've run into. Maybe they wanted to be coaches and just decided it wasn't worth it because they just weren't going to get the jobs that they felt they deserved. I also want to make it clear that the media started sounding the alarm right now, and there's still one job opening left. Shaming the Browns to quote unquote pick up the slack isn't the right way to go about things either. So Eric Bieniemy is definitely qualified to be a head coach. All you need to do is ask Andy Reid about how he feels about Eric Bieniemy. He's going to get his opportunity. It's just not going to happen this year. And quite honestly, there's only 32 of these jobs open. It's not like there's 100 of these jobs or even 1,000 of these jobs. There's only 32. I don't want to come across as sounding white privileged because obviously I am a white middle-aged man. So I don't know, but that's essentially what I think about what's going on right now. There's clearly a problem. I don't have a great answer or solution to solve this particular problem, but at the same time, I do still think the league is moving in the right direction. It just needs to move there a lot faster and a lot quicker than what it currently is.
Yeah, and to that point, Jay, I know we mentioned this in our chat yesterday or earlier this week, whenever we had it, that we joke about Stephen A. Smith, but what he said this week as far as the situation is justified. I don't have a problem with the tone or how he said it. Point blank, there is a problem. He was overtly animated about it, deservedly so. I feel the exact same way. I think at the height of, this rule, whatever you want to call it, we've had no more than, say, 8 minority coaches at any one time in the league. They talk about 1/4. And everyone figured, well, it'd get better. And slowly but surely, each of those coaches was fired for whatever reason due to team performance after only a few years. Look at the Arizona situation last season. They hire a minority coach and fire him after 1 year. And granted, you can, point at they wanted Kyler Murray as a number 1 draft pick, and they wanted an offensive-minded coach to pair with him so they can both grow together. Still doesn't make it right that, you hired a guy, saw the way the team was going, and you fired him at the end of the season. If you saw the way the team was going at that point, why not fire him midway through the season so you can set everything up to make sure you get this number 1 draft pick instead of letting him coach out the year? Mike Tomlin is the longest tenured minority coach we have in the league. We still have Lynn in Kansas City. You mentioned Flores, and Rivera just got hired for his second coaching job. And to Rivera, I like to say that this is something that we normally don't see, where a minority coach is fired by one team and immediately hired by another. Is something that rarely ever happens. I think the last time we've seen this happen is when Denny Green left Minnesota to go to Arizona. But outside of that, this is not something that happens where their white counterparts get fired left and right and constantly get rehired for jobs over and over and over and over again. Take Marty Schottenheimer, who bounced from the Browns to the Chiefs to the Chargers. Like, there was no downtime. He never took a coaching break or a year off or anything like that. The disparity as far as what people look for, or these owners, general managers, even in the front office, there's not enough minority GMs in the league. I think there may be 2, if that many, to even make these connections. And to a point to say that, well, I don't know many minority candidates, well, that's your fault. You should try to go out and get to know possible candidates, fill your staff with people who you see potential in who don't look like you. And I think therein lies the glaring problem. To what you mentioned earlier with the minority quarterbacks who don't go into coaching, a lot of them don't even get the same benefits. Like we talked earlier this year, and just before the season started, look at how many offensive coordinators are former quarterbacks who were journeyman backups. McCown, who played for Philadelphia last week, was a high school coach. I'm pretty sure at some point some NFL team is going to bring him in to be a quarterback's coach so he can work his way up the charts. But those are the guys you see go into coaching as quarterback coaches and then offensive coordinators. They start out as lifetime backups. Case in point, Doug Peterson, Frank Reich. We all know Eric Bieniemy. The talk on him all year has been he's definitely going to get one of these head coaching vacancies coming up. I don't wish Cleveland on anybody right now because there's too many personalities to deal with to rein them into anything coherently that resembles an NFL franchise. But will he get his opportunity next year? I hope so. But we're not shaming Cleveland's not the right way to do this. I definitely don't want Bieniemy to take the Cleveland job because I don't think it'll be good for him. If he's offered it, I'm pretty sure he'll take it. But again, that's a situation where I see him walking into a spot after maybe 2 seasons. If they don't turn it around immediately, he'll be fired. And the double standard as far as what success looks like when a white coach is in charge of a team as opposed to a black coach is also grossly disparaging, because you're talking about 3 years on average that minority coaches get to turn a team around, whereas their white counterparts tend to get 5 and build their team through the draft year by year by year. There's too many obstacles still to overcome as far as leveling the playing field so that it's equal for everyone. And I don't think it ever will be equal for everyone, but level it to the point to where you can look up and see at the very least a third of the coaches, 10 to 12 coaches in the league who, don't look like the status quo. And I don't know how we get there any faster than what we're doing right now, because the Rooney Rule, the owners have pushed back against that over the last 10 years. They don't like doing it. Seeing Marvin Lewis's name even come up, and look, no one on this podcast is going to say that, Marvin Lewis is a genius head coach. Competent, yes. His message probably got stale in Cincinnati after the number of years that he's been there. But when you see his name pop up, that just looks like a token interview. I'm sorry, it just does. None of these teams are actually checking for Marvin Lewis.
It's very true. It's very, and I think that was probably the most glaring of problems is what the Cowboys did in their coaching search. It was clear they weren't going to hire Marvin Lewis. Marvin Lewis was never going to be the kind of coach that Jerry Jones is looking for.
Can I just throw something in from across the pond?
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
I would say in an ideal world, and of course we don't live in an ideal world, doesn't matter what color the person is, you go for the best person. However, and you know, when we always talk about these ideas of, well, we've got to have a third of the coaches have got to be this color and a third of the coaches have got to be that color. Actually, no. In an ideal society, which we're a long way from, in any your side of the pond and my side of the pond, you have the best people doing the job, regardless of color. It doesn't matter anymore, and that's the kind of situation I think we've got to, as a world, you've got to get to, that we see past the color of somebody's skin to the qualities of the person to do the job. However, there are two issues I think, especially in the NFL. One of them is I don't think the opportunities are there at the lower coaching levels of the NFL game and also the college game to get ex-players especially into coaching and get into those positions and move up. There's just not enough of them doing that. And secondly, I think the bigger problem is, and that is a big society problem, because the owners who get all their money from the countries in which they live usually, most of the owners are still old white guys. And until that changes and society in your country and my country as well gets to the point where you have all different, you know, a mix of cultural people being rich enough to buy clubs, then I don't think anything will really change in the NFL until that happens. As long as you've got this vast majority of old white guys and women, of course, there's a couple of old white women who are owners as well. I don't think there'll be the push that there needs to be a change, and that's where the change can really happen, at the very, very top of the league, where the owners is a more diverse group. What are we looking at? Shad Khan, he's the
only one.
Is he the only owner who is what is he, Asian? Is he Indian or Pakistan heritage? Something like that.
Yeah.
I think until you see at the top of the game, you have billionaire Asian owners and billionaire black owners, then I think the game won't change because that's just how these billionaires are in America at the moment, and that pretty much the same in this country too. You know, we're historically a white culture, and it's and all the majority of rich people are white, and as you know, Jay, money talks.
Which is why it's amazing that Meghan Markle and Prince Harry are doing what they're doing.
Anyway, so back to the topic at hand here. As far as coaching, look, I've mentioned already before, like 9 times out of 10, and look, I understand that we're in a passing era of football, and every owner thinks they have the next best thing as far as a young hotshot quarterback, and they want the offensive-minded coach to lead the team. And you know, Jay, like you mentioned earlier, we're definitely going to reach out to some people in the offseason and try to figure out why there aren't more minority coaches on the offensive side of the ball outside of offensive line coach, wide receiver coach, running back coach. I mean, you look on the staff, those guys are pretty much almost always African-American for the most part, especially running backs and wide receivers. But when you start talking about that quarterback room, those guys, not a single minority in sight for the most part. I mean, Eric Bieniemy might be the only minority offensive coordinator in the NFL this past season. And when I saw, Byron Leftwich in Tampa Bay. So 2, Eric Bieniemy and Byron Leftwich. 2, the only 2 minority. You know, I could be wrong if there are others. I'm sorry I left you out, but those 2 names come to mind right now. So 2 out of 30 teams have minority offensive coordinators. I mean, to Byron Leftwich's point, he was a former quarterback and played well in this league for a long period of time, even was a backup towards the end of his career. The fact that he played, I think his career was 12 years, spent the last 5 as a backup, bouncing around between like Atlanta and I think Arizona or something like that. but